The morning of January 1st, 1970, at Cowichan District Hospital, located in the town of Duncan on Vancouver Island, Canada, began just like any other. Quiet corridors, the dim glow of duty lamps, muffled sounds from the wards, the usual atmosphere of a medical facility in the pre-dawn hours. However, for Nurse Doreen Kendall, this was not an entirely ordinary morning. Firstly, it was New Year's Day, a time most people spent with family and friends, not at work. Secondly, she was about to witness an event that would forever change her perception of the world. Doreen had started her night shift precisely at midnight. 12 hours on duty, from midnight until 8 in the morning. Not the most festive way to welcome the start of a new decade, but such was her service, her duty to her patients. She took her work seriously and responsibly. Doreen lived in the neighboring town of Nanaimo, and each workday, she had to travel about 26 miles, approximately 42 kilometers, along the highway to reach the hospital in Duncan. The drive on New Year's Eve had been particularly quiet, the roads almost empty, and Doreen's thoughts were occupied with the upcoming shift and perhaps a slight regret for the missed celebration. She worked on the second floor of the hospital. The night passed relatively calmly, without emergencies. Patients slept, only occasionally needing assistance or pain relief. As 5 o'clock in the morning approached, the hospital air began to fill with the anticipation of dawn. It was around this time, about 5 a.m., that Doreen and her colleague, Nurse Frida Wilson, began their usual morning rounds. It was a routine procedure, checking patients' conditions, taking temperatures, preparing for morning procedures. As always, they divided the wards between themselves for speed and efficiency. Frida Wilson took the patients whose beds were closer to the ward entrance, while Doreen Kendall headed towards those nearer the windows. This was their established practice, honed to near automation. Entering the next ward, Doreen quietly greeted the dimly lit room and walked towards the far window. Reaching it, working almost automatically out of habit, she reached for the heavy curtains. Part of the morning ritual was to draw them open, letting the first pale rays of the dawning day into the ward, symbolically welcoming the new morning for the patients. She confidently pulled the fabric aside, and in that same instant, she froze, as if struck by an electric shock. The motion stopped midway, her hand still on the curtain. What she saw outside the window was so unexpected and impossible that her brain momentarily refused to process it. Directly opposite the second-floor window, hovering absolutely silently in the air at an altitude of about 60 feet, around 18 meters above the ground, was a mysterious flying object. No helicopter lights, no roar of airplane engines, just silence and this incredible craft. It had the classic saucer shape, smooth, metallic, with no visible seams or rivets. In the center of the upper part rose a large, transparent dome, resembling a canopy or pilot's cabin. The entire craft was tilted slightly towards her, as if curiously peering into the hospital window. This fortunate angle, combined with the object's proximity, allowed Doreen to see it in astonishing detail, despite the pre-dawn twilight. Light emanating from the object itself or reflected from street lamps softly illuminated its contours. Inside the transparent dome, she clearly saw two figures. They were humanoid beings, standing side by side and slightly bent over something resembling an instrument panel or control console that stretched along the front part of the dome and flickered with faint lights. Doreen instinctively estimated their height. It seemed to her they were no taller than 6 feet, about 180 centimeters, quite comparable to the height of an average human. They wore dark, tight-fitting spacesuits or jumpsuits that completely covered their bodies. Their heads were covered by smooth helmets or similar dark headgear, without any visible faceplates or openings. It was impossible to make out facial details. She noticed that directly behind them, opposite the control panel, were 2 chairs resembling pilot seats, but the beings were specifically standing, focused on the panel, not sitting. Their postures conveyed concentration and purpose. Doreen stood by the window, paralyzed by a mixture of shock, fear, and incredible curiosity. Her heart pounded wildly in her chest. She had, of course, heard the local tales and rumors that the Cowichan Valley was a sort of magnet for UFOs, a favored spot for their visits. Newspaper articles occasionally appeared about strange lights in the sky, but it was one thing to hear vague stories, and quite another to come face to face with an alien craft and its occupants at arm's length. She wasn't prepared for this. No one could be. Time seemed to slow down. Doreen couldn't tear her eyes away from the incredible sight, trying to memorize every detail. And at that moment, as she watched with bated breath, something even more astonishing happened. One of the beings, the one standing on the left, slowly raised its head from the control panel and turned it directly towards the window where Doreen stood. It seemed to have sensed her gaze or simply noticed the movement of the curtains. For a moment, their eyes, or rather, her eyes and its helmet, met. Then this being lightly touched the arm of the second one standing beside it, clearly drawing its attention to the unwitting witness of their morning visit. The second alien also raised its head and looked directly at Doreen. There was no visible reaction, no surprise, no hostility, just calm observation. A second later, it lowered its gaze back to the control panel and began rapidly pressing or adjusting something. Almost immediately, the flying object smoothly, without the slightest jolt, began to move, slowly pulling away from the window. Only then did the stupor release Doreen. Realizing the object was leaving, she stumbled back from the window and cried out, her voice trembling, "Frida! Frida, come here! Quick!" Frida Wilson, having finished checking her patient, looked up from her notes in surprise and hurried over at her colleague's call. She reached the window just as the object had already moved away from the building but was still clearly visible. Frida managed to see it, a strange, disc-shaped, silent craft maneuvering slowly in the morning sky. Without saying a word, both nurses, seized by the same impulse, ran out of the ward and dashed down the corridor towards the nurses' station, where 3 other colleagues were finishing their night shift. Gasping from excitement and the quick run, Doreen and Frida breathlessly started telling what they had just seen, almost talking over each other. At first, the others didn't believe them, thinking it was a joke or a result of fatigue after the long night shift. But the insistence and obvious shock in Doreen's and Frida's eyes compelled the others to go to the windows at the station, which faced the same direction. They were lucky. The object hadn't departed completely yet. It made several smooth, wide circles over the hospital area, as if saying goodbye or completing some mission. All 5 nurses stood at the windows, pressed against the glass, silently watching this incredible aerial ballet. Then, after completing a final arc, the flying saucer abruptly gained altitude and shot off at an immense, unbelievable speed towards the northeast, quickly shrinking to a dot and disappearing into the brightening sky. A stunned silence fell over the nurses' station. The 5 women looked at each other with wide eyes. Now, no one had any doubts. They had all seen it. An ordinary New Year's shift had turned into an event they would remember and discuss for the rest of their lives. A routine check of the wards had led to an encounter with something far beyond their everyday experience and understanding. The Cowichan Valley had once again lived up to its reputation as a place that attracted the unexplained. And for Doreen Kendall, the world would never be the same again.